I worked double shifts for 8 months straight to cover her rent. I scrubbed dishes until my hands cracked, cleaned motel rooms during the day and served tables at night, just so we wouldn't lose the tiny apartment we shared. She had lost her job, said it was temporary. I believed her. I always did. She cried the day I paid the rent on her behalf. I told her, "It's okay. We're in this together." I meant it. I always meant it. So when she finally got hired again, when she bought a new dress and invited me to her company's mixer, I thought maybe things are turning around. Maybe she'll tell people about everything we've survived together. About the time we boiled potatoes for days. About how I skipped laundry so she'd have clean clothes. I stood next to her in a crowded room full of professionals and introductions. And then I heard it casual, effortless, like it cost nothing. "This is my roommate," she said, smiling, already turning away. Just that. Not friend, not lifesaver, not the reason she still had a place to sleep. Just roommate. I felt my chest tighten. My name wasn't even used. Not once. I stood there frozen, while the stranger she spoke to nodded politely and looked past me. I felt like wallpaper, background noise, disposable. And as she laughed with her coworkers, her new world unfolding, I stood in a dress I had borrowed from someone at work, with shoes that pinched in makeup I applied in the bathroom of the diner. I had imagined this night so differently. I had thought, finally, we'll be seen. But instead, I was erased with one word. And the worst part? She didn't even notice she'd done it. I stood there, clutching my glass of watered-down wine, trying to convince myself I'd misheard her. Maybe she just forgot. Maybe nerves made her say it that way. But deep down, I knew better. I watched her float through the room with ease, laughing, smiling, resting her hand lightly on people's arms like she belonged there. And maybe she did, but what did that make me? I lingered near the snack table, pretending to check my phone, hoping no one would ask who I was or how I knew her. Because what would I say? I'm the one who paid her rent when she couldn't. I'm the one who stayed up with her during panic attacks. I'm the one who skipped meals so she'd have enough for her bus fare. No one wants to hear that at a party. Especially not from someone in thrift store heels and a too-tight smile. I found an empty corner near the bathroom and stood there for a long time. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt something inside me sink. A quiet descent, like I had fallen, out of place and couldn't find my way back. I watched her introduce someone else moments later. "This is my coworker. She's incredible." The words rolled off her tongue easily, effortlessly. I wondered how it felt to give out praise so freely, yet forget the one person who showed up for you when no one else did. She made eye contact with me once that night, just once, and she smiled. A shallow, distracted smile. The kind you give to someone standing in line behind you at a store. In that moment, I realized something heartbreaking. I thought we were family. She thought I was just convenient. And there's no friendship left in that imbalance. I left before dessert. She didn't notice. Or if she did, she didn't follow. I slipped my coat over my shoulders and walked 4 blocks in heels. That blistered my feet, but the sting there was easier to carry than the one in my chest. The apartment was dark when I got home. Quiet. I sat on the couch without turning on the light. Just sat, shoes off, heart loud. I kept replaying that one word, roommate. How clean it was. How efficient. Like I was a line item on her budget. Rent, split, groceries, shared, presents, optional. I looked around the living room at all the things we had built together, curtains we picked out at the thrift store, mugs from our old place, the bookshelf I assembled with a bruised thumb. I had filled this home with pieces of us, but now it felt like only her name was written on the door. I started wondering if I had misunderstood everything. Had I imagined the closeness, the late-night talks, the laughter over cheap wine, the way we once held hands when the landlord knocked too loud? Had it all just been convenience wrapped in comfort? I opened the fridge and stared at the shelves. I had stocked her favorite yogurt. The exact tea she liked after long days. The oat milk she preferred even though it cost more. I bought it without question, without keeping score. But maybe I should have, because it turns out some people keep score anyway if they never show their hand. I sat on the floor, back against the fridge, and whispered something I hadn't said in years. Maybe I'm not enough. Not enough to be named. Not enough to be seen. Just enough to keep someone else from drowning until they learn to swim away. The next morning, she made coffee like nothing had happened. She hummed a little tune, barefoot in the kitchen, the sunlight painting soft stripes across the counter. "You left early," she said casually, pouring herself a cup. I watched her. From the hallway, still in the clothes I had folded carefully for the party the night before. "Yeah," I replied. "Got tired." She nodded, already scrolling through her phone. No apology. No hesitation. No flicker of recognition in her. Voice, just routine. I waited for her to circle back to say something that would undo the knot in my chest. But all she said next was, "I think we're out of oat milk." I nodded again. I had bought it 2 days ago. I didn't say that. I didn't say anything, because I was starting to understand that she hadn't forgotten me last night. She had chosen not to include me, and there's a difference. Forgetting is human. Choosing is something else. She wore the dress I'd helped her pick out, the shoes I gave up overtime to help her buy, and yet, in every detail of her life that was now moving forward, there was no trace of me. Not even in the corners. I sat at the kitchen table stirring. A cup of coffee I didn't want. My stomach was tight. My throat dry. She chatted about someone she met at the event. "She's a senior editor," she said, beaming. "Might help me get an interview." I nodded again, my jaw aching from holding back everything I didn't say. I could hear myself breathing. That's how loud the silence had become, because in that moment, I realized I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased efficiently. Gently, like I'd never been essential at all. For the next few days, I moved through the apartment like a ghost. I did the dishes quietly, folded the laundry before she noticed, replaced the oat milk, paid the electricity bill when it came in late. She thanked me once with a distracted smile over her shoulder as if the lights had magically stayed on. I started counting the moments. She looked through me, like when she brought new friends over and never introduced me, or when she laughed at her phone and didn't share why. The small exclusions, the passive silences, that's how people leave you without packing a bag. And I began to wonder, had I imagined the friendship entirely? Had I confused proximity with connection? Because when she cried in the kitchen months ago after losing her job, I held her hand like it was second nature. When she couldn't pay rent, I didn't think twice. I didn't ask for a promise or an IOU. I just worked harder, slept less, ate whatever was left. Now, she came home with new stories, new names, new schedules. She started locking her bedroom door, started using headphones at dinner, and I still buying her tea, still washing her favorite mug felt like furniture. Familiar, convenient, unseen. I stopped talking unless spoken to. I stopped asking if she needed anything. I started to realize I had become a placeholder in her life, someone to keep the house running until she built something better, and maybe that was the truth all along. I wasn't her friend. I was her fallback. And now that she no longer needed saving, she no longer needed me. That realization didn't come with tears. It came with silence. And sometimes silence says, "You've already stayed too long where you were never meant to be." That weekend, I stayed in my room. I cleaned it top to bottom, not for her, just for me. I folded my clothes carefully, repotted the tiny plant on my windowsill, and opened the blinds wider than usual. For the first time, I noticed how much light the room could hold when I let it. I sat on the bed and made a list, not of bills, not of groceries, but of things I missed about myself. Things I used to love before I started dimming my needs to keep someone else afloat. Reading before bed, cooking just for fun, writing short stories that never made it past page 3. Laughing without checking if someone else was okay first. I read the list over and felt something unfamiliar. Grief, not for her, but for the parts of me I had ignored to be helpful, available, dependable. I had become a background character in my own life. Someone who worked, provided, supported, but never asked to be seen. And the truth is, I let it happen. Because somewhere along the line, I started confusing being needed with being loved. I believed that if I kept saying yes, if I kept showing up, someone would eventually turn around and say, "You matter too." But no one ever did. I left the list on my nightstand. It wasn't a plan, just a reminder that I had needs too. That I was tired. That I wanted out, not necessarily from the apartment, but from the dynamic that lived inside it. That night, she asked if I wanted to order dinner. I said no, and I meant it. Not out of bitterness, but because I had finally lost my appetite for begging, for shrinking, for being introduced like I didn't matter. I was starting to remember that I did. I began waking up earlier than her. Not to cook, not to tidy up, just to sit at the kitchen table alone with my coffee. I liked the quiet, the kind that wasn't about being ignored, but about being present. I started journaling again, filling 1 page a day. Nothing dramatic. Just truths I hadn't had room to speak aloud. I miss who I was before I needed to be useful all the time. Some silences are not peaceful, they're suffocating. I didn't show her. I didn't need to. These pages weren't for her understanding, they were for my survival. Slowly, I reclaimed small parts of the apartment. I took my mug out of the back of the cabinet and placed it at the front. I lit a candle in the living room without asking. I moved my favorite chair closer to the window and sat in IT oven when she was home. These seem like small things. I know, but when you've spent months shrinking to make space for someone else, even a few inches of breath feels like freedom. She noticed, I could tell. She hesitated more when speaking to me, as if sensing that the script had changed and I wasn't waiting for cues anymore. One afternoon I came home and she had made dinner. She offered me a plate with that same distracted smile. I thanked her but didn't eat. I wasn't punishing her. I just wasn't hungry for that version of us anymore. I no longer needed to be fed by guilt or performance. I was learning how to fill myself differently, with boundaries, with air, with the quiet joy of choosing myself. And the more I did, the more I realized I had been a good friend. But I had also been invisible. And that would never happen again. I started going on walks again. Early ones, before the streets filled with traffic or noise. I'd slip on my sneakers, tie my hoodie tight, and just move block after block. No destination, no performance. The city felt different at that hour, honest, like it hadn't put its makeup on yet. I'd pass the same corner cafe always, closed at that time, and imagined myself sitting there alone with a book and nowhere else to be. I hadn't done that in years. Being alone without feeling lonely was a muscle I hadn't used in a long time. After a week, I stepped inside. That cafe, ordered a tea, brought a notebook. No expectations, no one waiting on me, no one needing anything. Just me, my thoughts, my voice, and it was enough. I wrote a few paragraphs about a character who worked double shifts and vanished in her own story, until she didn't. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. I was learning to see myself even when no one else did. That afternoon when I got home, she was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She looked up, noticed the book bag slung over my shoulder, and asked, "Where have you been?" I smiled and said, "Out." That was it. I didn't offer details, didn't apologize for being gone. She blinked, surprised, not because I was late, but because I was different. I went to my room, closed the door, and felt no guilt. For once, I wasn't shrinking to keep the peace. I was growing even if she didn't notice, and that growth didn't need applause. It just needed space. And the more I claimed that space, the more I understood. Being forgotten by someone else doesn't mean you have to forget yourself. That night, I made dinner for myself. Nothing fancy, just pasta with roasted vegetables, garlic, and olive oil. I played my favorite playlist out loud while I cooked something I hadn't done in months. For so long, I had kept the volume low, kept my footsteps soft, kept my presence small. But that night, I let the music play. I let the water boil without apology. She came into the kitchen halfway through and watched me from the doorway. "You seem ... different," she said. I looked up and met her eyes. "I am." I didn't say it with anger, just truth. She lingered there like she wanted to ask something else. Maybe she was trying to find her place in this new version of the space we once shared unevenly. But I didn't fill the silence for her. I didn't reach across the room like I used to. I just stirred my pasta and turned back to the stove. When I sat down to eat, I didn't ask if she wanted some. Not because I was punishing her, but because I had spent too long offering pieces of myself that went untouched. I lit a candle, poured a glass of water, and blessed my own plate with both hands. She went back to the couch. I stayed at the table. We were only a few feet apart, but the distance between us had changed, and I didn't feel sad about it. I didn't feel bitter. I felt grounded, whole, clear. I had waited months to be seen, to be named, to be honored. But that night, I did something better. I named myself. I honored myself. I cooked for the woman who had been hungry for more than food, and when I took that first bite, it tasted like something I'd nearly forgotten: freedom. I started putting money aside. Not much, just a little from each paycheck, tucked into a separate account she didn't know about. At first it felt disloyal, like I was hiding something, but then I remembered how long I had hidden myself. My exhaustion, my needs, my growing resentment. This wasn't secrecy, it was preparation. I didn't have a plan yet, only a feeling. I was nearing the end of something, and I didn't want to leave empty. I wanted to leave whole. I stopped doing her laundry. I stopped adding her favorite snacks to the grocery list. I didn't slam doors. I didn't start fights. I simply ... disengaged, quietly, consistently. She noticed. I could tell by the way she lingered near me in the kitchen, by the sudden compliments that came a little too late. "You're really good at managing things. Thanks for covering that bill last month." But her tone always held that edge, like she was trying to recall something she once had easy access to. I smiled when she spoke, but I no longer leaned in. I no longer gave her warmth she hadn't earned. One evening she asked if I'd like to go out for drinks. "Like we used to," she said. I hesitated, but not because I was tempted. I hesitated because I realized she still didn't. No, she had hurt me. Not deeply, not permanently. She thought my distance was a phase, something I'd get over, but I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. I looked at her and said gently, "I've got plans." I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. And as I Walked to my room. I knew I was no longer living in her orbit. I was building my own. One quiet decision at a time. I began looking at apartments. Not obsessively, just now and then, in the quiet moments before sleep. Tiny studios, shared spaces. Rooms with too much light and not enough furniture. I wasn't sure when I'd leave or how soon I could afford it, but the act of searching felt like air. A reminder that I wasn't stuck, only paused. Each listing was a window into something different. A life where I didn't have to tiptoe, didn't have to guess whether my presence was a burden. A life where every corner was mine, even if it was small. One morning I passed by a building with a for rent sign in the window. I stopped, wrote down the number. I didn't call. I didn't rush. I just folded the paper and placed it in my wallet like a secret seed. Something to water later. That same day, she asked if I could spot her rent just for this month. I felt the words hit the center of my chest like a rerun of everything I'd already lived. But this time, I didn't flinch. I looked at her really, looked and asked, "What's your plan after that?" She blinked, confused, unprepared. She had always assumed I would say yes. And to be fair, I always had, but not now. Not anymore. "I can't keep doing this," I said quietly. Not without losing parts of myself. She didn't argue, didn't thank me, just nodded and left the room. And in that silence, I felt something click into place. Not revenge, not closure, just clarity. I wasn't responsible for saving people who didn't see me. I could care deeply and still leave. I could be generous and still say no. And from that moment on, I promised myself I would never fund my own erasure again. That weekend, I packed a single box. Just my books, my journals, my favorite mug, the plant from the windowsill, and the photo of my younger self that I'd kept. Tucked in a drawer for years, I didn't tell her. I didn't slam doors or make speeches. I just moved one piece of my life at a time. Each item I wrapped felt like a thread being untangled from a web I had mistaken for home. There was no rage, only release. I stood in my room, now slightly emptier, and felt something expand in my chest space. The kind of space that doesn't echo with loneliness, but with possibility. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I didn't dream of arguments or apologies. I dreamed of a key in my own hand, a front door I could close behind me without asking permission. When I awoke, the apartment felt quieter than usual. She was gone out with friends maybe, or at work. I didn't check. I poured my coffee, sat at the table, and wrote a note. Just 2 lines. "Thank you for what we had. I need something different." Now, I didn't sign it. She would know. I placed the note on the counter and looked around one last time, not with regret, but with respect. I had given this place everything I had. And now, I was taking the best of me with me. As I locked the door behind me, the hallway seemed brighter. Not because the lights were new, but because I was no longer dimming to match someone else's story. I was ready to begin mine, not as just the roommate, not as the background, but as the main character in a life that finally belonged to me. The new place was small. A studio with creaky floors and mismatched tiles. One window that stuck in the corner, and a fridge that hummed louder than it should. But it was mine, every inch of it. I rolled out a rug I found at a thrift store, set my mug on the counter, and watered my little plant by the window. No one else's laundry to fold. No forgotten dishes in the sink. No silence thick with disappointment. Just me, my breath, and the quiet pulse of starting over. The first night, I sat on the floor with a bowl of soup, cross-legged and barefoot. Watching the light move across the wall, there was no Wi-Fi yet, no distractions, and still I felt full. Not with food, but with something I had been missing for years, my own presence. I was no longer surviving someone else's chaos. I was creating calm, slowly, imperfectly, but on my terms. I hung one photo on the wall, me at 19, smiling with chipped nail polish, holding a notebook to my chest. I looked at that version of me and whispered, "I found you," because somewhere along the way, in all the shifts and sacrifices, I had lost her. I had stopped asking what she needed, stopped checking if she was okay. Now I was listening again. Each morning I made coffee in silence. Not the silence of being ignored, but the kind you earn, the kind that heals. I didn't think about her anymore, not with bitterness, not with longing, just space. She had written her version of the story. I was writing mine now. And for the first time, I wasn't editing myself out of the paragraph. I was here, fully, finally. Without apology, a few weeks later, I ran into her grocery store, aisle 6. We both reached for the same box of tea. She paused. I didn't. I smiled polite, steady, and said, "Hi." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Surprise? Guilt? Trying to find a voice? "Hey," she said, shifting awkwardly. "I've been meaning to, but..." She stopped there. Whatever she'd been meaning to say, she didn't. And I didn't ask her to. I nodded gently and stepped aside. "Hope you're doing well," I offered like you do with distant acquaintances. Her face changed, like she was trying to locate the old version of Mitha, one who bent, who filled the air, who made it easy for her to forget I was human. But I wasn't her safety net anymore. I wasn't the roommate. I was the woman who left, who built a new life without needing to announce it. She mumbled something about work, about how things have been hectic. I listened. I didn't rescue, I didn't affirm. I just let her talk until she ran out of things to say. "We should catch up sometime," she added, eyes scanning mine for an opening. I met her gaze and smiled. Again soft, sincere, closed. "Take care," I said, and walked away, not fast, not triumphant. Just, sure. With the tea in my basket, I moved down the aisle, heart quiet. There was no need for closure. I'd already written mine. And as I walked out into the sunlight, bags in hand, I realized something important. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting. I was free. And that kind of freedom, it doesn't shout. It doesn't need witnesses. It simply walks forward light, whole, and never again mistaken for less than everything that night. I lit a candle in my tiny apartment and sat on the floor with a notebook in my lap. I wrote one final sentence on the last page. I was never just the roommate. I was the reason the roof stayed over our heads. Then I closed the cover and pressed my hand over it, not in mourning, but in gratitude for surviving, for learning. For leaving, I poured a cup of tea, the same brand I once bought for her, and this time, it tasted like mine. The windows were open, the air cool, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floor, the gentle flicker of the candle, all reminders that I was here, and I had made this space with my own hands. No one else's silence defined me anymore. No one else's convenience held my worth. I had traded constant sacrifice for soft, steady self-respect, and it fit me better than any borrowed dress or broken friendship ever did. People say healing is loud, but mine was quiet. It happened in unspoken no's, in afternoons spent alone without shame, in the joy of walking through a door that only opens for me. I used to think being left behind meant failure, but now I know sometimes being left is just the universe making space, so you can stop begging to be seen and finally look in the mirror. Not to fix, not to prove, but to honor. I was always more than support, more than filler. I was foundation. And now I've become the home I needed all along. No roommates, no apologies, just me present, peaceful, and never again waiting for someone else to call me enough.